It is a truth universally acknowledged that I have already annoyed a large subset of potential viewers with this historically inaccurate getup. I apologise to the members of the historical costuming community, who make up more of my target audience than you might think. I have to say, I have been looking forward to doing this video for a while. It has been, I think, 4 years in the planning. I bought this shit 4 years ago. But Pride and Prejudice is one of my favourite classics, so I definitely wanted to do this video justice. And I really love exploring literature and historical figures through a neurodivergent lens. Literary analysis has always involved examining works through various lenses, and these lenses might be biographical, psychological, or historical. And so the neurodivergent lens is really just another tool to analyse literature. And regardless of whether dead Jane Austen is being harmed by this video, I think that there is a potential benefit for modern readers who see themselves reflected in this character and then can use the neurodivergent lens to have those characters reflected back to themselves. And when you recognize your own experience in beloved and cherished works, it validates that these ways of being are not disorders or modern inventions, right? Like, we didn't invent autism in the 80s. Autistic people have always existed. And I think especially when it comes to looking at this novel, Pride and Prejudice, what we're doing here is reclaiming the narrative. I think a lot of people don't see this as a very neurodivergent book, and I read this as an exceptionally neurodivergent book. And probably, actually, rather than using the word neurodivergent, which I'm using as a catch-all, but I think specifically, I think this is a very autistic book. For centuries, and probably still today, certain behaviours are moralised as character flaws. And this is especially true for autistic behaviours. You know, we can perceive social awkwardness as rudeness. We can perceive intense interests as obsession, or, you know, probably more commonly back in Jane Austen's time, directness might be seen as impropriety. And I had to practice saying that word many times because I just couldn't. I don't think I've ever said the word impropriety in my life. I kept on trying to put an extra R in there. So we're not really diagnosing here. What we're doing is we're just looking at this through the perspective, through the neurodivergent, through the autistic perspective. And maybe if dead Jane Austen didn't want to be picked apart on the internet 200 years after her death, she shouldn't have written such a perfect case study in how society moralizes social competence. So if you don't know, Jane Austen was a British writer born in 1775, known for her wry and ironic wit. Pride and Prejudice is her most famous novel. There have been multiple television and film adaptations, but since I'm a purist, I will be referring to the original source text throughout. Now, I'm not going to be engaging in any debates about whether the 2005 film is better than the BBC version from 1995, because there's simply nothing to debate. Sam, stop alienating your audience. Sorry. Anyway. Whether or not the characters in Pride and Prejudice were or were not autistic or neurodivergent doesn't really matter as much as what her writing reveals about how society treats people who don't conform, socially, emotionally, or behaviourally. Austen's world, like our own, moralised social competence. Those who couldn't mask were often called foolish or insensible. Those who could get to be charming or virtuous. But don't you dare be too charming. We'll get to that later. Without ever naming it, Austen's work does a good job of highlighting people who don't really fit in. People who feel things too strongly, miss social cues, overanalyze, or isolate themselves. Now, I don't think we should discount the possibility that Austen was autistic. Though that's not the main focus of this video, we know she had a disabled older brother described as mentally abnormal and subject to fits, which could have been autistic meltdowns. And, you know, we know autism is hereditary, right? So I think it is a possibility. But even if we set aside the speculation about Austen herself, there's something worth noting about the kind of mind drawn to writing, and especially writing in that era. You've got to be an observer more than a doer. You've got to enjoy solitude for long stretches of time. You've got to get vaguely obsessed with your story and probably hyperfocus if you want to have a chance of finishing. I mean, I cannot even imagine writing out books by hand, my goodness. And you probably also have to have an enjoyment of language that sets you apart from most people. I just don't think you can write stuff like Austen did if you went to balls and spent them actually dancing and socializing and enjoying yourself. It's observational humor and commentary. And I definitely think if she was alive today, she'd have some sort of commentary channel on YouTube. Another isolated loner career.
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jane, and today we're going to do a get ready for the ball with me while we discuss my new book, Pride and Prejudice. And if you find yourself excessively diverted like Lizzie Bennett, be sure to check out this brand new merch I just dropped.
So here's what's interesting about Austen. Once you start looking for it, her novels are obsessed with social competence. Who can navigate the rules? Who can't? And crucially, how does she judge them for it? Those who cannot or do not conform, whether because of awkwardness, intensity, or a different way of seeing the world, they are moralized, ridiculed, and often punished by the narrative. But those who master social codes, they get rewarded with happy endings and financial security. And that pattern reveals something profound, not just about Austen, but how literature in general enforces social norms. It shows us how outsiders are treated in this moral universe. Literature, of course, is a mirror of real social dynamics, both then and now. And so if we want to understand how neurodivergent people might have been treated in the past, we already know that a lot of them were locked up, imprisoned, put into institutions. I'm sure some of them were left in the forest. But if we want to understand this fully, we could pay attention to how literature portrays people who are different. And when it comes to Pride and Prejudice, we should pay attention to who gets mocked in these books that everyone loves. Because Jane Austen does a lot of moralizing, and we'll get to that.
If you love Austen, you might love Bronte too, and here's your chance to live it. From March 7th to the 11th, just 3 weeks away, I'm hosting a retreat for neurodivergent business owners, freelancers, academics, and creatives. We have a few spots left still, and I'd love for you to join us. We'll be hosted at the incredible Broughton Hall, the grand Yorkshire manor where the 1992 Wuthering Heights was filmed. And yes, it's exactly as atmospheric as you're imagining. This is not your typical business event. Instead of rushing from session to session and having cringe-worthy networking events, you'll have space to actually think. We'll zoom out on your business together, looking at strategy, branding, and what you genuinely want your work life to look like. You'll be surrounded by other inspiring neurodivergent people with gentle opportunities to connect if you want them, and plenty of room to wander the estate, breathe in that fresh Yorkshire air, and just reset. If you've been needing time to figure out where you're going in business and how to actually get there, this might be exactly what you need. Head to wildbrainsretreats.com to learn more, and I'll put all the links and details in the description box below. Now, back to the video.
So let me walk you through some of the characters now, because Austen has a surprising variety of autistically and ADHD coded characters, and I think once you see these patterns, you can't unsee them. I want to start with Darcy, Mr. Darcy, Fitzwilliam Darcy, because he's my favourite, and if you've watched some of my OG channel content, you'll know he was in one of my first ever videos as an autistic headcanon. Mr. Darcy is deeply, deeply relatable to me because I absolutely understand that feeling of immense cringe within yourself, where every attempt to socialize or express your feelings seems to backfire. I find it very interesting that he's considered one of literature's great romantic leads, because if you take away his good looks and fortune, you have a socially awkward 20-something bookworm who struggles to make small talk, is perceived by many as a snob, and although he's not really, well, arguable, and fails to connect with people outside of a few trusted friends. And I know that we can interpret his transformation in the latter part of the novel as he changed because he loved her so much. But did he actually? What changed is that Elizabeth looked beyond her first impressions and reevaluated her prejudice with a fuller understanding of context. And suddenly he makes small talk once with her uncle, and she's like, oh, he's a new man. Why did I never see this side of him before? But fundamentally, as she tells Wickham, he remains as he ever was. He just discovered masking. She flat out told him that he's socially awkward because he doesn't practice his social skills like she doesn't practice the piano. That's rude. So he goes away and I guess practices. He learns how to mask. Is that really romance? Another character who is quite similar in temperament to Mr. Darcy is Mr. Bennett, but having lower social status and fewer financial resources puts him in a very different context. Darcy doesn't need to care about social norms because of his vast wealth and standing. He could easily not change and find himself any number of brides. But Mr. Bennett, on the other hand, is responsible for marrying his 5 daughters off to prevent their eventual destitution upon his death. His inheritance by law has to pass to a male heir. He has no sons, so that will be his cousin, who we'll talk about in a bit. And he doesn't seem very concerned by this. The way he parents is pretty blasé and emotionally distant. I don't think we had gentle and responsive parenting back then, but maybe. He frequently avoids conflict and noise by retreating into his study. He does appear to be noise sensitive, and he really does not enjoy the socializing and schmoozing required to get his 5 daughters married off. And he's frequently aggravated by the constant chatter of his wife and daughters. He seems to be someone who prioritizes intellectual pursuit over social obligations, and he's tolerated because of his position. They're not exactly, lower class. I don't know exactly what level of class they'd be considered, but he's a gentleman. That I know. He's a gentleman. What does that translate to in the class system? Who knows? So he's kind of tolerated, but barely. And the narrative isn't especially kind to him either. His withdrawal and detachment from these very real issues contributes directly to the family's disasters. So speaking of Mr. Bennett's cousin, I have to mention Mr. Collins here. He's introduced as kind of a de facto villain because he's going to inherit Mr. Bennett's estate, even though that's not his fault. I think he is universally portrayed very autistically in both the novel and all adaptations, every adaptation that I've seen. I absolutely will argue with anyone that Mr. Collins is autistic. He's got to be. But he's presented by Austen as a character deserving of mockery. It feels a little bit mean, actually. When I was younger and I read this, I was all like, haha, Mr. Collins, what a loser. But it is mean. The entire Bennett family take the piss out of him to his face the first dinner that he's there. They goad him into talking about how he socially scripts and prepares compliments for future use. First of all, that is the social scripting, and when he talks about preparing compliments and stuff, I'm like, that is the most autistic thing I've heard. It's actually pretty nasty behavior from the Bennetts. I know that they're pissed off. I know. But anyway, and Jane Austen seems to be on their side because this man is silly, right? He lacks self-awareness and has pretty poor social skills, but he tries really hard nonetheless. He is obliged to find a wife, but we don't really ever get a sympathetic portrayal of him. He's portrayed as obsequious and sycophantic, 2 great words that I've been dying to use, by the way, rather than practical, which I think is what it is. But if you think about him in the context of finding a good, respectable, whatever you call it, he's a vicar, so patron. Finding a good, respectable workplace with a generous patron, like that is his attempt at fitting into society. That's his attempt at masking, and he wants to keep that standing. So I cannot believe where this video has ended up because I am now defending Mr. Collins, but here we are. I'm not defending Mr. Collins. I'm defending the traits that we're supposed to be mocking. Austen is not sympathetic at all to him. She describes him as not a sensible man, and the deficiency of nature had been but little assisted by education or society. His manners were very formal. So university or education didn't help poor Mr. Collins be less awkward. He has a very formal tone in all his communication and speech, which is actually would count as one of the diagnostic criteria in the DSM for autism, if we're going to be like that. But the point is, Mr. Collins tries to follow the rules. He just doesn't have the intuitive social grace to pull it off smoothly. And for that, He's ridiculed. Mary Bennett is quite similar here. She's reserved, pious, and very studious, not interested in the social stuff at all. Do you see a pattern with Austen's work yet? A lot of what she says appears to be quotes and things derived from other sources. So she'll frequently interject with philosophical statements about the situation without actually being a part of the conversation. Her speech patterns are also rather atypical and formal, just like Mr. Collins. And she's obsessed with music and studying and prefers those activities alone over everything else. She frequently avoids going on walks and spending time with her family in favour of study, which, to be honest, do we blame her? And Austen treats her with a mixture of pity and kind of mockery. Mary isn't charming enough or socially fluent enough or self-aware enough to be taken seriously. And I totally ship her with Mr. Collins, by the way. I genuinely think they would have been an excellent match. But the larger point here is both Mary and Mr. Collins are earnest. They try. They follow the rules as best they understand them, and they are punished for it narratively, because they can't perform those rules with ease or charm. So let's talk about Mrs. Bennett, who is extremely talkative, gossipy, and lacks self-awareness to an extreme. But she also has really significant anxiety. She's always talking about her poor nerves. She's constantly getting emotionally overwhelmed and having to lie down. And the emotional intensity after Lydia's elopement, sorry, spoiler alert, spoiler alert on a 200-year plus book. That's the way the internet goes these days. Lydia elopes, by the way. The emotional intensity after Lydia's elopement left her pretty much bedridden. In her own words, "Tell Mr. Bennett what a dreadful state I'm in, that I am frightened out of my wits. Have such tremblings, such flutterings all over me, such spasms in my side and pains in my head and such beatings of heart, and I can get no rest by night or nor by day." Those are pretty intense symptoms, whether psychological or physical, but she is not written sympathetically here. We're supposed to laugh at this and think, how ridiculous. But this is a pretty intense sort of panic and anxiety problem. So if we do look at the novel through this wider neurodivergent lens, not just autism, but sort of, we can see that she has high levels of anxiety. But part of her personality is also a real love for fun social occasions, beyond the need to find husbands for her daughters, but she loves it. She loves the stimulation. She loves the gossip. She yearns for the thrill of flirting with the officers. And remember that she's not actually that old. Me in this getup, I'm probably older than Mrs. Bennett now, and I'm wearing short sleeves. Sorry, that's another historical inaccuracy. I should be wearing long sleeves as a married elder lady now. Anyway, she cares about the well-being of her daughters. She does, but she also doesn't really care a lot about social norms. She cares that her daughters are married and they're married well. She's quite impulsive, expressive, and lacks a filter that the proper society demands. And we can see all of these things in her daughter Lydia as well. Lydia Bennett is impulsive, rash, unthinking, and can't stop talking. Obviously, these are seen as major character flaws in Austen's England. But the interesting thing is she never really once expresses any kind of shame about who she is. So either she's embraced it, or she just doesn't care about social expectations and norms, just like her mother. But because of these perceived moral failings, Austen is on her. Lydia is described throughout the book as a silly girl, selfish and impulsive, even though she's only 15. Running off with Wickham when she was 15 was the exact same thing that Georgiana Darcy was going to do. But Georgiana is never derided as silly or selfish, is she? No, because she's sweet and quiet and probably beautiful and plays the piano so delightfully. She's a far more perfect victim. To me, it seems fairly obvious that Lydia, and probably also her mum, display traits that we might now associate with ADHD. She acts impulsively, whether that's spending food money on a hat she doesn't even like, or running off with a scoundrel and bringing shame to the entire family. She's oblivious to the feelings of those around her and lacks the self-awareness to moderate her behaviour. So I've talked a lot about the Bennett family as a whole, and we haven't yet talked about Elizabeth and Jane, the two oldest sisters, and the only two who aren't constantly derided by Austen's narrative. Because Jane is the epitome of every good moral value in their society, as well as being extremely beautiful, which helps, I guess. She's very sweet, quiet, easygoing, and naive, to the point where she'll go along with other people and not see when she's being taken advantage of. She seems to rely on her sister Lizzy for a lot of social guidance, but she's rewarded for her gentleness and her ability to conform to the expectations of femininity. Elizabeth Bennett is the protagonist and the most interesting character to analyse from a neurodivergent perspective. She's more complex than the others because she's the main character after all, but I would argue that one thing that she is really good at is masking. She's a funny character. She seems to be very well read and on Darcy's intellectual level, despite having no formal or really any informal education. So she must have been self-motivated to read and study, perhaps her dad taught her, but she's also very keenly aware of social rules, who's breaking what rule. But this doesn't actually seem to integrate her into wider society. She's a little bit on the outskirts too. She doesn't act inappropriately for the most part, and she doesn't come across as bookish like Mary does, but she's actually fairly misanthropic. She says, "There are few people whom I really love, and still fewer of whom I think well. The more I see of the world, the more I am dissatisfied with it. And every day confirms my belief of the inconsistency of all human characters and of the little dependence that can be placed on the appearance of merit or sense." Elizabeth is basically me in my late teens going off to study psychology in order to understand people, even though she fucking hates most people. And this was my peak masking era as well. And there's a reason why she falls for Mr. Darcy. He's deeply introspective, fairly misanthropic too, and philosophical. But even though Elizabeth is our heroine, she doesn't show much of herself, even to the reader. We know that she's kind of a romantic at heart. She wants to find someone with a true connection and will not compromise, probably after seeing the disaster of her parents' marriage. We know she likes reading, but she's not like a nerd. We know she's socially competent, but she doesn't really like people. It is hard to get a sense of her, but also really easy to project yourself onto her, to see yourself in her, which I think is why she's such a popular character. She could very much represent a character that masks and reflects other people back to them, like a social chameleon who can blend in. Elizabeth is rewarded in the narrative because she can navigate society while maintaining her intelligence and wit. That is, intelligence and wit is something that Austen clearly favoured above all else. That, I don't think, is reflective necessarily of wider society. I don't think the wider society then would be like, oh, a woman needs to have intelligence and wit. I think that's an Austen thing. And Elizabeth has mastered the performance, but I think it's still a performance. Now let's talk about Wickham, the villain of this piece. I know what you're thinking. I'm going to diagnose him with scoundrel personality disorder or something. But don't worry, I won't. He is arguably terrible, but there are a fair few men like him around. I met quite a few at university for some reason. Just because you're terrible doesn't mean it's a disorder. Austen's villains are always really charming and easygoing. It's like having great social skills is kind of also a red flag in Austen's world. And that says a lot about Austen also, I think. Wickham is superficially charming and manipulative, which contrasts with the Bennett family as a whole, who are actually much more straightforward and, dare I say, naive. He easily identifies targets, and while Georgiana is obviously the ideal target because of her wealth, Elizabeth and Lydia are vulnerable too. I talked about Lydia not being the perfect enough victim of his grooming, but Elizabeth comes across as so savvy and knowledgeable about the world, and her being fooled by Wickham is portrayed as being tricked by her own vanity. Clearly by now we realise that Austen loved a good moralizing. I didn't realise just how much she did it until I wrote the script, actually. I think for Elizabeth it wasn't so much vanity as naivety in her initial interactions with Mr. Wickham. He was playful and fun to talk to, and all of that combined can be very dangerous. And I speak from my own experience as a high-masking former 20-year-old who liked to think they were savvy enough about people to not be played by other people, and I was proven wrong many times. Despite intelligence, despite trying to be as savvy as possible in a world that doesn't really get you, you are still vulnerable to manipulation and exploitation. You should have known better, but you didn't. So you try harder to understand people. You study psychology at university to try to understand people. You still don't understand people. Yeah, we're talking about me now. So what does this all add up to? Austen's novels are, of course, cultural commentary, and these patterns are there. The first is that difference is heavily moralized. If you can't conform, you're not just awkward, you're foolish, silly, or insensible. It's a moral judgment rather than just an observation. The second pattern is that masking is rewarded. Darcy and Elizabeth succeed when they learn to perform the expected social scripts. Not necessarily at the same time, but Elizabeth throughout the novel and Darcy towards the end of the novel. Authenticity without social skill is punished. All of the characters who are authentically themselves in their own ways, they're all kind of ridiculed or punished in the narrative for it. They're not performing correctly, so they become cautionary tales. Charm without substance is dangerous and effective. Wickham succeeds precisely because he understands the game. The Bingley sisters use their social fluency as a weapon. Meanwhile, people like Mr. Collins, who genuinely try and fail, are the ones we're supposed to laugh at. And wealth can replace social skill entirely. We haven't talked much about Lady Catherine, but Lady Catherine faces no consequences whatsoever for being rude and intrusive. Darcy can afford to be withdrawn, but Mr. Bennett's similar withdrawal is treated as a moral failing because his family need him to be socially active to secure their future. Gosh, Austen was really so cruel to all her characters who lacked self-awareness, wasn't it? Like, lacking self-awareness in Austen's world was the worst thing you could possibly be. Austen's perspective shows us that social awkwardness, intensity, or unconventional behavior have always been moralized in society. These aren't new prejudices. These same patterns exist today. We still reward people who mask effectively. We still judge people who are too much or too awkward or too intense. We still treat difference as moral failing rather than just difference. The main thing that's changed now is that we have words for it, so we can say neurodivergent instead of foolish or insensible. We can talk about masking instead of just calling people charming or well-mannered. We can recognize ADHD traits instead of dismissing someone as silly and impulsive. But the underlying social dynamics have not changed as nearly as much as we'd like to think. And maybe that's why these novels still resonate today. We see ourselves in these characters because the tension between authenticity and social performance is universal, especially when you're autistic. We love Darcy because we've all felt misunderstood, because we've all had that moment when we've tried to express something important and it came out completely wrong, because we've all been judged on first impressions that didn't capture who we actually are. We sympathise with Mary because we have a special interest that other people find boring or annoying. We understand Mrs. Bennet's anxiety even when it's loud and unfiltered. And we get why Lydia acts without thinking, because sometimes your brain moves faster than the consequences. We even love Mr. Collins a little bit. Okay, maybe that's just me, but because we've all tried really hard to fit in and still got it really wrong. We've all had moments where we've followed the script we thought we were supposed to follow, and it still didn't work. And we love Elizabeth because she feels like proof that you can have it all. You can be smart and socially competent at the same time, that you can be observant and critical of society while still succeeding within it. Because she makes us feel like we can be authentic and win. Except she's not as authentic as she thinks she is she? She prides herself on her judgment and independence, but she's wrong about Darcy, she's wrong about Wickham, and she completely misses how desperate her best friend Charlotte's situation actually is, until Charlotte accepts Mr. Collins' proposal out of sheer pragmatism. She's so good at her performance that she forgets who she actually is. And maybe that's why we love her most of all, because we've all been there, thinking that we figured out the system, that we're seeing through everyone else's performances, only to realise that we were performing too. We just didn't notice because the mask fits so well. These characters persist because they reflect the perennial struggle of fitting in or not in a world that rewards conformity. Austen's world had much stricter social rules in some ways than ours, but the fundamental dynamic is the same. Conform and succeed, or be yourself and risk everything. And that's why reading Pride and Prejudice through the neurodivergent, through the autistic lens matters, because it helps us see how long these patterns have existed and how deeply embedded they are in our culture. So ultimately, I hope what you've gained from this video isn't that I'm desperately trying to stick a label on a diagnosis on a character. Apart from Mr. Collins, I'll stand by that, but rather that I'm using a neurodivergent lens as a starting point for discussion, for analysing this novel and possibly others, if anyone's interested or has any suggestions for other novels that I could look at through this lens. Of course, they're fictional characters and behave as such, but autistic people exist today and they existed back then. Of course, back then they were often undiagnosed and unidentified, left to roam the pages of Austen's novels, their fate never to be truly understood, or rather to be understood only as eccentricity, moral flaw, comic relief. Thank you for watching. I'm not sure I need to be telling you to let me know your thoughts down below. I'm sure you already have by this point. Before I go, I should just mention that I'm not the only person who has thought about this. There are a couple of books on the topic that I haven't actually read, but probably should have before making this video. The first is called So Odd a Mixture Along the Autistic Spectrum in Pride and Prejudice. And the second is called Writers on the Spectrum, How Autism and Asperger Syndrome Have Influenced Literary Writing. So I'd love to know if these books are any good, if anyone has time to read them or perhaps has already read them. I have 2 kids, so my reading is more in the Julia Donaldson oeuvre right now. But if you want my next video to be about how Fox from Fox's Socks has severe ADHD and is being gaslit by his mouse companion, please let me know in the comments down below. See you next time. Bye. Autism is highly hereditary. It often... He's frequently aggravated by the... Just gonna have to itch. The emotional can't do it. Oh my god, I'm gonna have so many bloopers. Impulsively? This is gonna take forever. Because in this video, I'd rather... And so the neurodivergent lens, I think, is simply another tool to analyze literature. I've put here it's giving me not like other girls vibes, honestly. That was not a great line, Sam. Don't write that. I have a bit of a scratchy throat, which is also why my neck is kind of swollen at the moment, so good luck to me.